about Syria. There's a new offensive there in East Aleppo. I'm wondering if the White House still believes that the ceasefire that was agreed to is still in effect, and if you do, sort of what kind of case can you make for it at this point?
Well, Tolu, I mean, we clearly have seen an increase in violence over the last several days, and that's not a welcome development at all. In fact, the arrangement that we tried to reach with the Russians was engineered to try to reduce violence. And unfortunately, that only worked for a rather short period of time. Look, over the last several days, we have seen Syria announce their intent to unilaterally withdraw from the cessation of hostilities. We saw an attack on UN aid workers for which we hold the Russians accountable, because we know that it was either carried out by the Russian military or by the Syrian military. And Russia is the party that's taken responsibility for keeping the Syrian military in line. And obviously, striking a humanitarian aid convoy is way out of line, entirely inconsistent with international principles, and in the view of many people, potentially a war crime. You also saw President Assad make a statement yesterday, falsely ascribing blame to the United States for this increase in violence. Nothing short of a bald-faced lie. And then you had the announcement overnight, East Coast time, of a new offensive by the Syrian government in Aleppo. Considering that Russia is the party that has taken responsibility for ensuring Syrian compliance with the cessation of hostilities, Russia's culpable. And if this arrangement has a future, Russia's going to need to step up and prove it. And they've got some work to do.
You often said that this is a test of whether or not Russia is willing or able or to sort of have influence on the Syrian regime. I'm wondering if you've been able to make an assessment on whether, since this is basically broken down, whether they were unwilling or whether they were unable, and if you think there's a difference in terms of White House policy, in terms of whether or not it was one or the other.
Yeah. Well, listen, that's an interesting question, actually. I think it is. I'm not prepared to offer an assessment in each of these cases whether or not it was weakness on the part of Russia, where essentially they were rebuked by the Assad regime, and despite Russia's warnings, Assad went ahead and ordered the actions that he did. Or if Russia failed to clearly communicate to Assad what their expectations were. It's too early to tell exactly whether they were unwilling or unable.
Or a third option could be that they were not being straight with the U.S. and they see some benefit to having an agreement with the U.S. and not fulfilling it on their end. Is that something there?
Yeah, I guess I would see that. I would put that in the unwilling category, which is to say they weren't willing to go to the Assad regime and actually make them live up to the terms of the cessation of hostilities. But I guess the question you're asking is, does it matter? I guess it's hard to say. It certainly matters if they're unwilling, right? Because it certainly does raise significant questions about their credibility. If they were unable to, it raises similarly difficult questions, because the only reason we're really having this conversation with the Russians is they seem to be the only people that we can talk to that do have any influence over the Assad regime. And if they don't, then I'm not really sure why we would continue talking to them. So Well, again, we're going to have to see how this plays out. And when I say how this plays out, we're really just going to have to see what the Russian response is. The credibility is on the line under either scenario. And they're going to have to decide, President Putin is going to have to decide, whether he's interested in protecting that credibility in the international community or not.